Hello and welcome to Video Game Hangover. I'm Randy Dickinson and I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hello, I am DJ Ross in Mountain View, California.
Each week on Video Game Hangover, we talk about the games that have been keeping us up at night. This week we're playing Somerville, Beacon Pines, and Zelda II: The Adventure of Link.
Zelda II? We dangle that carrot again?
We promise. We have been, I have not, but DJ has been feverishly playing Zelda II: The Adventure of Link.
I know how much you've been wanting to talk about Zelda II.
Mm.
I just want to, do what you want to do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your flexibility. DJ was all, we should really talk about Pokemon all week because it's arguably the biggest release of November 2022. And I was like, nope, Zelda 2 all day.
Oh, man. How the tables have turned. Which Pokemon did you end up picking up? Did you go for the Violet or was it Scarlet? I keep wanting to say Crimson.
Oh, I don't know.
Orange. Oh, you got the secret third Pokemon.
Pokemon Orange.
Oh, don't know what's going on in that one.
No, I think I've tried. I think I've made a good effort as an adult and a co-host of a video game podcast to force myself to get into Pokemon games, and they're not for me. Not everything has to be. That's fine. It's just like once a year I feel very left out of like the collective video game thing when everybody loses their mind about Pokemon, and I've tried. I think I've made a pretty good effort.
You've made a fair effort. Did you like that Arceus game, or I can't remember where you ultimately sort of landed on that one?
I liked it for a while. I think I hung in there for a bit. It's certainly the Pokemon game that I have logged the most hours with. Mm-hmm. But I certainly didn't get to the point where like I had the entire Pokédex and had, all the iterations of all the Pokemons collected. I had a couple of shinies, but not all the shinies. That was the game that I learned what a shiny is from you right here on this podcast.
Yeah, remember that? Was that this year or was that last year?
That was January of this year. Yeah.
Oh, so it could still be, could be showing up on your list in a couple weeks.
Anything's possible. Yeah.
Not a couple weeks, like a month from now. What am I talking about?
So I put a bunch of hours into that game. I had a good time with it. I think it suffered from a lack of variety. I've been a little spoiled with open world games. This was very much felt like a lather, rinse, repeat structure for an open world game. At some point I kind of went, is this all this is? So
I feel like a lot of people had that reaction.
Yeah.
But I didn't play it, so I shouldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
I heard the new one's real good, though, if you can look past all the just really catastrophic glitches that seem to be popping up.
I don't... I really have only sort of heard this sort of the online kind of narrative and discourse about the glitchiness and sort of broken nature of the game. So I don't know if you get beyond that, just how much people are enjoying it.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like early reviews were positive, but then it actually came out and people started posting all these videos of like, well, look how low the frame rate is and all the characters are animating weirdly and just stuff you don't really want to see in a Pokemon game. So, or like any game, really. But
sure.
Just disappointing.
Yeah.
Sounds like I could have used a little more time in the oven.
Maybe, yeah. That is sort of the unfortunate side effect of these kind of annual release games is that, they are never not going to hit that release date. A couple weeks before Thanksgiving, every year, there's going to be a new Pokemon. So, hopefully.
I feel like they weren't always annual.
No?
Or like last year, it was it was like the remakes of the DS game.
Right.
But I forget how, I feel like that's a very recent thing. They've tried to get one out every year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I associate it with I feel like it's up there with like a Call of Duty or a Madden kind of situation where, yeah, to a certain degree, there is something in the pipeline for Pokemon once a year around this time.
I don't know the exact cadence of it, but I felt like for a while they would like come out with the main game, which would have 2 versions, and then some point down the road they would have a 3rd version, which sort of I shouldn't be talking about Pokemon to this extent,
but Game of the Year edition.
No, I mean, would that be accurate?
Possibly. I don't know.
It was just like a 3rd one.
Yeah.
Like there was Diamond and Pearl. Those are the ones I'm most familiar with. And then, oh man, I'm going to embarrass myself. What was the 3rd one? It was like...
I think you already are. I think you're on this.
Way past this point.
I am not your phone a friend on this, DJ. I really...
This is the one where it's like, why'd you call me? I don't know anything about Pokemon.
Right, exactly. I'm in the shower. What are you doing?
Yeah. Told you I was going to be on this show later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they're really trying to make it a more annual thing than it has been. Or maybe it's just been annual since the beginning. Again, wrong people to ask about this.
Yeah. I don't know if it's been annual since the beginning, but it's definitely sort of become that association I have in my brain. But again, clearly I'm not the target audience for this, and it seems like neither are you. So,
I thought I would just troll everyone, and instead of playing Scarlet or Violet, I can at least get those names right. I would play Shining Pearl, which was the remake from last year. Everybody's excited to talk about the new games. I thought that would also be very on brand. Because I do want to play those at some point, but I never...
I recall those being very well received. People seem to like those.
I feel like it was kind of mixed. But I also don't know how seriously to take criticisms from Pokemon fans, because they have very high expectations for these games.
Yeah. I there is another podcast that I occasionally check out, and there is a collection of very enthusiastic and opinionated Pokemon consumers on that show. And initially, the first 3 or 4 minutes of any sort of conversation about the current state of Pokemon, I'm kind of intrigued. But when they get into the 25th minute, I'm like, okay, guys, we need to move on. So
I feel like every Pokemon fan wants... Or, not every Pokemon fan, but those Pokemon fans. They want every new Pokemon game to be just Breath of the Wild, but with Pokemon in it. Like, when they first showed off those remakes, I took a look at the trailer, because they were remakes of the ones I played the most. And I just thought, well, this looks great. This looks so fun. It looks kind of like an updated version of those old games. And I went on the internet, which, bad move. And everybody was talking about how terrible the graphics were, and I just like, are we watching the same trailer for this thing? I don't get it. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
That's the point where I just thought I just not on the same level as these hardcore Pokemon fans.
Yeah. I mean, not for lack of connection with the world, because I fired up my my Switch last night, and my friends list sort of refreshed, and it said 13 people are online right now, and I went, holy cow, 13! Like normally it's 2 or 3. So I flipped over to the friend menu to see the friends list to see what everybody was playing, and it was either Scarlet or Violet. It was mostly Scarlet, honestly.
Interesting.
Yeah, but 12 of those 13 people I think were playing some variation on Pokemon.
I feel like, there's always one of the two that is clearly going to be the more popular one. I think, Scarlet seems like the shoe-in, but I feel like I would go Violet with this one. It's like I went Pearl over Diamond. Nobody liked the Pearl version. But whatever.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's my problem. I'm just playing the wrong version.
Yeah.
Maybe if I played Diamond, I would have been like, oh, this does look terrible. You guys were right.
Gee, make better choices, DJ.
Well, at least we're making progress. We're identifying what my problem is.
Right. Yeah. In any situation, the problem is likely you.
Yeah.
And I say that about situations that involve me. Any situation that involves me, the problem is likely me. So,
I thought you were going to say, when there's a situation involving the both of us, I am usually the problem.
You're the problem. No,
but you're just saying that you're taking responsibility for...
In any circumstance in my life where there is a problem, I am generally the source of that problem. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I was like, well, that's a very considerate outlook to sort of assume you are to blame, that you're not immediately just going to other people and being like,
yeah,
why did you mess this up?
It's sort of a weird sort of like personal ethos where, you used people in the world who are like, oh, screw my life. I have the worst luck. Nothing goes the way I planned. And I'm like, well, the common denominator in all these situations
exactly.
is you. So maybe look within before deciding, oh, today's not my day. My horoscope didn't line up the way that it was supposed to. Maybe there's other factors at play here.
I actually think that the source of my problems is the planets. So that's clearly not on me.
Yeah. I work with somebody who hopefully never hears this, but is a very enthusiastic and well-versed planets in alignment, horoscopes, moon rising, Jupiter ascending kind of person. And it's all I can do on conference calls to not like go full Snopes, science debunker person on them. And I'm like, no, you're entitled to your delusions. Go for it.
Yeah, I've gotten in a lot of trouble when it comes to astrology, so I'm just not going to say anything.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Far be it for me to condescend to the myths and stories that sort of define your character. Go for it. I'm like, I'm sure I've got a head full of my own bullshit, but yeah, yours just seems a little noisier.
Okay, well, moving on. Let's put Pokemon and astral
who else in our
alignment
community
behind
can
us.
we alienate in the first 15 minutes of the show? Yep. Send your hate mail to...
Yeah, exactly. No, don't send us hate mail.
No.
Send us your burning questions. How's this for a segue?
Yeah.
Because coming up very soon is the Drunktacular. People know what that is? It's our end of year show. I forget how we do this. It's been like probably about a year since the last one.
It's been a year.
So, yeah. But it really snuck up on us this year. There's just been a lot going on, apparently. Man, so many Pokemon to keep track of. But if this is your first year listening to us, at the end of the year, at the end of the broadcast season, we like to do a live show as the final episode of the year, in which we take listener questions, that's questions from you, the listener, and answer them live on the air while enjoying an adult beverage or two or three, or forget what the record is at this point. But that's the general idea. And it's a lot of fun. And like I said, it's coming up much sooner than either Randy and I anticipated this year. So we just want to let everybody know now is the time to start coming up with your burning questions that you would like to have us read live and answer in various mental states.
Right. These can be questions about video games. That seems to be the natural place to start. It could be, or anything else, anything that's on your mind. Questions about current events, questions about DJ and I. Maybe
I don't know how good of an idea it is to ask about current events.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you've not been a voracious listener to Video Game Hangover since episode 1 and are wondering about how DJ and I met, what video games we've loved in our youth or anything like that. We can certainly dig into that kind of stuff. So yeah, don't limit yourself to the scope of video games. If you have questions about lawnmower repair, how to make a cocktail.
Nearly anything is on the table.
Sure.
So use your imagination.
We don't do a lot of editing.
You don't do a lot of editing.
I don't do any editing, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zero editing.
I don't know if we've ever had to cut content from these. Like, it's usually been fine. I mean, I don't know what we would cut. Is that something that would get us in trouble? Would get other people in trouble? I feel like one year maybe it was suggested that people ask us for auto repair advice. And I don't remember how that ended up going because I don't remember a lot of the stuff that we talk about in these shows.
It's weird that the examples of questions to ask us for me are always sort of hinged around repairing something.
So anyway, with that in mind, come up with your best, mechanical engineering questions for Randy. But whatever you come up with, make sure you send in your questions soon because the live show will take place on Friday, December 9th. So make sure you get your questions in and submitted by the end of Thursday, December 8th. We'll be recording on twitch.tv/VGHangover. And you can send in those questions to us on Twitter, if that's still working, hopefully. Twitter/VGHangover. You can join our Discord and post it in the channel there. You can email them to us at contact@VGHangover.com, or, this is exciting, you can call in on a telephone and record a little voice question for us. And that number is 682-999-VGH1. That's 682-999-8441. Just leave us a little voice message, and we'll play that on the air, too. That's fun.
Yeah, that's definitely fun.
And because that was a lot of stuff, you can go to VGHangover.com/drunk, or just go to that website, and there's a post up at the top with all that information again.
And since it is a live show, we hope you will join us, hang out in the chat, cheer us on, motivate us, ask us additional questions, anything else that's on your mind. We would love to have an opportunity to interact with you while we're recording the show that night.
Yeah, I forgot about that. You just put stuff in the chat.
Getting into the holly jolly holiday spirit while enjoying adult beverage and kind of wrapping up our video game year.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun. Just hanging out in a very questionable evening. But hope to see you there. Otherwise, it will just be in the podcast feed as normal.
Yes. Yeah. Well, cool. All right. I'm going to start figure out what I'm going to drink.
Yeah, me too. I will come back to that next week, I think.
What a champagne problem.
Exactly. We can't call it that anymore. We've done that already.
I feel like maybe we owe our listeners some Zelda 2, DJ.
I thought you'd never say that. I think it is time for some Zelda 2, though. Yeah. And what good timing, because at this point, I have completed Zelda 2.
Yay!
Once again. I concluded the journey that began on Extra Life Weekend so many months ago, whenever that was. But I managed to wrap up the entire game this weekend, and I have to say, Zelda 2, still amazing. Still love it. That's my take. That's the whole segment. We're
amazing,
good. Still
love it.
Yeah. It's been, I forget how many times I've gone over this at this point. It's not the most popular Zelda game. It's definitely the weirdest one.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you count those, CDI abominations. But, it's not really your typical Zelda format, so I think that puts a lot of people off. Also, it's very, very difficult. That part, I was like, I wonder how much of the difficulty was just due to the fact that I was playing this and I was 10 years old at the time. Or maybe it was actually really difficult. And it turns out there actually are a lot of really challenging sections in this, which may land sort of weird with you, especially if you came from Zelda 1.
Which I thought was painfully difficult. Is
Zelda 1 also quite difficult?
Yeah.
But Zelda 2 is difficult in a completely different way, which would probably throw you off if you were all right, I've mastered Zelda 1. I'm just untouchable in the combat in Zelda 1. And you jump into Zelda 2 and it's just a 2D, I guess it's kind of a platformer, but it's an action game in sort of a different sense than Zelda 1 was an action game. But it's a lot of sword fighting.
I was going to say, that's probably an interesting place to start. So what is it about Zelda 2, for those who have not played all variations on Zelda over the years, that makes it kind of an outlier?
Well, so I guess the most notable thing is it's no longer the sort of top-down open world style game that Zelda 1 and many of the following Zeldas were. Well, actually, many of the 2D Zeldas. Let me just say that. It feels to me almost like a proto JRPG in a way, because you start out in a little side-scrolling section, and most of the action sequences are side-scrolling. So you start out in Hyrule Palace, I believe, but as soon as you leave, you just get dumped out onto this overworld, which looks like you're in Dragon Quest or something, where you're just a little tiny Link sprite walking around, and you can see green fields and trees and kind of paths leading to various destinations. And you just walk around for a while until you run into a town or something. You can go into the town and talk to townspeople and collect clues as to where you should be headed next. And eventually you make your way to dungeons, or palaces as they are in this game, which is not, that's the same sort of thing you were doing in Zelda 1. It's roughly the same loop where you will go into a palace and find the treasure, sort of the helpful item inside, and then fight a boss. But the thing that's weird about this is that once you're no longer on the overworld, once you've gone into a town or a cave or one of these palaces, it turns into this 2D side-scrolling like action game. And you're doing things that you didn't do at all in Zelda 1. Like, you're jumping around and you're having sword duels, which, I mean, you're fighting stuff with a sword all the time in Zelda 1, of course, but Zelda 2 really ups the complexity in how you deal with these encounters. So just really different feeling than Zelda 1.
Well, cool.
Does that sound cool to you?
Yeah, well, I think the Zelda series does occasionally settle into a bit of sameness.
Sure.
And Zelda 2, it's probably hard to sort of like make that argument that like everything was the same. There had only been
this
one Zelda
was
game
exactly the same.
Yeah. But I mean, what a pivot. And you could just remake Zelda 1 and call it Zelda 2 and sell 1 billion copies. And Nintendo chose not to go that way.
Yeah. I feel like this was a very kind of typical thing to do back then because, Mario is a weird example because the Japanese Mario Brothers 2 was very much the let's remake Mario Brothers 1 approach. But then you have stuff like Castlevania, which kind of turned from an action game into like they introduced more RPG elements and there was more of like a non-linear approach to that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, just speaking of Castlevania, that may be the closest thing if you're having trouble picturing this if you've never actually played Zelda 2, because Link is, an upright sprite at this point. He's not the little squatty guy from Zelda 1. And he's swinging his sword around like you would, like almost like how he would swing a whip in the NES Castlevania games. Visually, it looks fairly similar. But as you go around, the experience feels much more like a JRPG to me in that you go to these towns and you collect clues. And in a way, it's almost a little easier to keep track of everything than it was in Zelda 1. Because in Zelda 1, you just had the whole overworld open to you pretty much immediately. And you would have to just scour the entire thing for clues to where to go next. Like, where's the next dungeon? I don't know. I'll just wander around this entire overworld until I happen to stumble onto it or find a character who will give me a hint as to which direction I'm supposed to be going. And that can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
But in this one, in Zelda 2, most of the time, you just head to a town or something. There's a very finite number of places you can go for information because you'll like go to a town and then you just talk to people and somebody will occasionally give you a hint. And then once you have an idea of where to go, there's also a finite number of places where you can sort of investigate. It's not like the entire overworld is, or like any tile on the overworld could be some sort of hidden secret, like it felt like in Zelda 1. But there are noticeable like caves and the palaces are visible in the overworld. So if you pick up some clue in a town, you can just go down a list of like, well, so did I check this cave? Did I check this other cave? And it feels much more difficult to sort of get lost than it was in Zelda 1, which was kind of welcoming. But if you're looking again for that sense of like open world sort of adventure and mystery, it's not quite. You don't get quite the same sense of it from Zelda 2. But it does feel like much more focused in that sense. So I think that is probably good. Or at least different. It's different that they shook it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that sort of sense of scale was initially hard maybe to capture with a 2D platformer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely sort of came later with probably things like Castlevania, right? And the Metroidvania structure of a video game.
Sure.
Yeah.
I actually find, I haven't played a whole lot of Castlevania 2, but Metroid is a good comparison because if you imagine, I don't know how much you've played of like Metroid 1 or Super Metroid, but it's very easy to get lost in that game, and that's kind of the point half of the time. But I also really appreciate that in this one, if you're not in one of the actual sort of palace sections or one of the little caves that takes you to the palace section, you're just on this very abstracted overworld where you walk around until you actually run into something that's interesting, whether it be a town or the next palace you're trying to find. This is something you'll appreciate. This, I think, is the only Zelda game with a random encounters in it.
Oh.
It's a little different than how it would work in Dragon Quest or something. But basically, when you're on the overworld, generally there's like a dirt path that you try and stay on. And as soon as you wander off the path, or not, sometimes not immediately, but after you've been off the path long enough, these sort of the black silhouettes of enemies will pop up around you and start swerving all over the place. And if one of them catches you, you have to do a little random, like, side-scrolling encounter with them. So it's just kind of an interesting way of adding sort of challenge and this weird random factor to the overworld. Because eventually you have to get off the path, whether it's to wander into a cave or trek through the desert to get to one of the palaces. And you have to deal with these random enemies popping up.
Oh. I was going to say, why would you ever get off the path? But
yeah. It would be a very uneventful game if you just stayed on the path the whole time. Just like hanging out in towns, wondering why nothing ever happens. But then, so the other thing, and this is the thing I ended up really enjoying this time, is the combat in the side-scrolling sections is actually really cool. A lot of the time you're just dealing with like minion enemies that are not very difficult, and they just go down in one or two hits or whatever. But occasionally in the palaces especially, you will run into enemies who also have a sword, and sometimes they also have a shield. So basically they have your moveset. And then whenever one of those guys shows up, you just have a little sword duel with them. And this is the most interesting thing of the game to me, I think, is that it's very simple. Like you have, by default, if Link is just standing there, he's got his sword, or he's got his shield raised. But you can duck to block low hits, but you want to make sure you have your shield back up in time if they're doing a high attack at you. And then you have to be blocking these attacks, which are quite frantic, depending on which enemy you're fighting, and also trying to land hits that are getting around their shield. So depending on whatever their stance is, you have to plan your attacks accordingly. And they start out very simple. Like some of the enemies, like the first enemies you encounter don't even really have shields. And then you'll run into enemies that they have a shield, but they'll never like lower it. They just always keep it raised. You can pretty much always just take out their legs or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then you start running into these knights that are like very proficient sword fighters, and you really have to be on your toes because early on, before you've leveled up Link, which is a whole other thing, you take so much damage from these guys. They're really dangerous, and you really have to be paying attention. Like they'll have a tell of how they're going to swing their sword, and you have to be ready to block it and kind of deliver your counterattack. And it starts out like, I remember these guys being terrifying when I was playing this as a kid because they were just so difficult to beat. And this time around, it started out fairly easy. I was surprised, actually. I thought, well, this isn't so bad. Like, I got through the first couple of palaces, actually, I think, without using the little, the handy rewind feature that the Switch has, the Switch Online thing.
Oh, gotcha.
And I was like, all right, so I'm a pro at this. This is amazing. But as soon as you get into probably the third or fourth palace, they really crank it up with these knights. And by the end of the game, you're fighting these knights are like jumping around all over the place. They're shooting fireballs at you. There's just all this crazy stuff happening. And it is so hard. So that's the difficulty level I remember. But the exciting thing to me about it was that the more I fought these knights, I could just feel myself, or I could just feel the combat getting easier. Like it just spending enough time with it to get more experience with it and kind of learn how to deal with these knights was very exciting. And it kind of felt like playing a Dark Souls game or something, where the early hours you're just kind of observing and trying to figure out how the enemies work. But by the end of it, you've hopefully learned like all the patterns and the techniques to counterattack and everything, and you're just like taking these guys out. I don't know if I ever reached like a top level of proficiency or anything, but I certainly was doing better after like fighting handfuls of these guys than I was towards the beginning.
And that level of complexity works with that was the NES, right? That was a 2-button controller essentially. So
yeah. It's really amazing because you really just have like an attack and a jump button, and your shield is always just in position by default. But despite this being on like NES hardware, all the action and like especially the sword fighting is so like fluid and responsive. It was kind of cool to come back and experience. Because I also played Zelda 1 recently, and that, in comparison to this, felt like fairly clunky. Like sometimes Link wouldn't always do exactly what you wanted him to do. But this one, it feels like there's just a super technical action game buried in the middle of this weird JRPG light kind of Zelda game.
Interesting.
So that was a pleasant surprise. Like I was saying, towards the end of it, I was a little overwhelmed by the difficulty of these nights. It certainly reaches that sort of Nintendo reputation for making an incredibly difficult game. And I found myself falling back on that rewind feature quite a few times. Because I just can't imagine, like, I don't know how I actually managed to get through this game back in the day. Because I would finish this game, or I have finished this game multiple times, but I don't know how I did it. The nights towards the end of the game are so difficult. Was I going around them? Was I just skipping over them? Or, I don't know.
And so does the rewind feature on the Nintendo Online service just allow you to go back and fight better or smarter, or does it actually, you say rewind, but does it let you skip some of that stuff?
So it's not like granular enough where you could like get hit and then just be like, oh, I'll hit undo on that one hit where I didn't have my shield in the right place. You usually have to rewind. I don't know actually how long it takes you back. It's like maybe a couple seconds every time. And I started trying not to abuse it too much. Like I would go into a fight and try and get through the entire thing, unless it went south really badly. So, I'd like finish the fight and sort of look up at my health bar and go, I think I could probably do better than that. I think I could get out of this fight with a few more health bars remaining. So I'd rewind the whole fight and do it over. But by the end of it, I was just like, the guy would get in a hit and be like, oh, no, that's not good. And then just rewind that. And it was kind of shameful. But I just don't know if I have sort of the patience to master the sword fighting at this point. Like, I really just wanted to experience the whole game again.
Yeah. No shame in that.
Sure. It was a bit more of a tour this time than, me trying to struggle through to the end.
You probably doubled your playtime by repeating everything over and over again.
Maybe not quite, but yeah, a significant amount was, going over and replaying these fights over and over again. I'm just mystified, though, that I was able to finish this game at all as a kid, because the last boss was a struggle, even with the rewind feature. The last boss is sort of like the ultimate, like the peak of, like, it really tests your skills with the dueling system.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember as a kid, what I would do is I would like play this whole game normally, and then when the last boss showed up, I had this controller with a turbo button on it, which would just, Link would swing his sword as fast as not even humanly possible. He would just like swing it way more times than you could conceivably push the button, I guess. And I would just do that, and Link would just mash the last boss to death, apparently. But just going through this again, I was trying to imagine, like, I don't even know how that worked. It seems like the last boss is just way smarter than that. So I have no idea. I distinctly remember going through this game multiple times, getting all the way through the last boss without really, like, I didn't have rewinds, I didn't have cheat codes or anything, and somehow seeing the ending on multiple occasions. Somehow. Through some divine force, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. You had to work a little harder for it this time.
Yeah, I was really caught off guard.
To rush out and buy a turbo controller.
Maybe that was what I was missing. But still just super fun to come back to this. I think it's still, there's some parts that definitely haven't aged as well. Some parts are not quite as, they're not very respectful of your time as many of these old NES games could be. But luckily, there's that rewind feature. You can just go back and hop over that invisible like pitfall that you couldn't identify before. And I ended up having a lot of fun with it. I've said this before, but I think that now is the time for them to do a Zelda 2 remake. Like, take this cool combat system and smooth out all the sort of rough edges around it. But I think people would be really into it, like, especially people who are into like really technical action games at this point, like Dark Souls or something, or even, I want to say like Bayonetta. It's not quite like that style of action game, but just, those games where you just have to be very deliberate in what you're doing and you really have to be mentally dialed in. I think it could really work for this. Plus, it has that weird reputation where people are like, oh, Zelda 2, nobody likes that one. So I feel like that keeps people away from it. Plus the fact that it's just fairly old in general.
Yeah.
Like, it's worth taking another look at this game, sort of like they did with Link's Awakening a couple years ago.
Yeah. I've never attempted to play this. This is a weird sort of circular reference, but a number of years ago, I played an Adventure Time video game.
Yeah.
That the creators, it's a way forward game, were very sort of public about saying that this is basically Adventure Time skinned over Zelda 2. And I didn't have a point of reference for that at the time of playing it, but I had a good time with that game. So, yeah, I mean, it's a 2D side-scrolling, combat-based game set in the world of Adventure Time and all the characters and hooks from that. But yeah, apparently there are a lot of things in it that sort of touch back to Zelda 2. And yeah, I certainly have an appreciation for that because I have an appreciation for Adventure Time. But yeah, I've never gone back to sort of like look for the places where they steal sort of liberally from Nintendo on that. But yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like that should work. And it's surprising that was sort of the creative choice for Zelda 2 at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked, I mean, it must have been really interesting developing games back then, especially sequels, because I feel like there was less sort of inclination to just make the same thing again. It felt like they really branched out in a lot of cases, especially in Zelda's case.
Yeah, I can see that. Actually, and I can see that is sort of very frustrating for modern gamers. And that just, I want that thing that it was before, and why don't they just make that thing over and over again?
Yeah.
And that was never sort of the model initially. I think Paper Mario gets that a lot. Why do all the Paper Mario games feel different? Why do they not just make that cool first one or second one over again? And the creators have been very clear that it was like, no, it's Paper Mario is not like a series in the traditional sense where there is a sameness between all of them. It's a visual style more than anything. And we, apply different game mechanics and different rule sets on top of that visual style.
Yeah. I feel like in general, Nintendo is fairly good about not making the exact same thing again as a sequel. Like Zelda games, they do have a lot of very similar elements between them, but it seems like there's always at least one or two really big systems that are different every time. I'm really paranoid, actually, that the new Breath of the Wild sequel, whatever it's called, is going to be like Breath of the Wild again. Like just like an expansion pack or something.
Sure. That's fair, and I can absolutely see that watching the trailers for it.
Yeah, and I don't, given Nintendo's track record, I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think that's what a lot of people, I think a lot of people will be fine with that.
Yeah.
But so much about Breath of the Wild was the fact that it was like a complete unknown from the beginning,
right.
And it was so surprising continuously that I just don't know how they're going to be able to replicate that unless they go like completely off the rails or like completely break the mold. What's the expression? There we go.
Yeah. Well, the scary part of that, too, is that it's a direct sequel. And that sort of generally doesn't happen with Zelda games.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be easy to lean into just being samey because it is a continuation of the thing that came before, a direct continuation of the thing that came before. So
yeah,
who knows? I mean, there's obviously still a lot of very unknown things about that game. And like you said, sort of the delight of playing Breath of the Wild for the first time and going, holy cow, this is what Zelda is now. That sort of shininess is definitely lost a little bit. So I think, Nintendo has to bring it in some other way to inspire that awe again.
It's going to take a lot to replace that feeling from playing Breath of the Wild the first time.
Definitely. I mean, the good news is that Breath of the Wild is a good game beyond that surprise.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We will see in March of 2023, right?
Is it March? Wow, that's so soon.
Is it March or May? Do I have the wrong M month?
I feel like it's later. I don't know. I really haven't been keeping up with it because I'm just like, I don't want to know about it. Just finish it and then we'll check it out.
May 12th. I had the wrong M month.
Okay, well, that's fine. It gives me a little longer to wait.
Time to get a replay of Breath of the Wild.
No. It would be incredible. I mean, I imagine it will be not too far from the Breath of the Wild template, but what if they did like a Zelda 2 style pivot? Like, what would that even be if it was just, a character action game suddenly?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, Super Mario
Make
Odyssey
a lot
found
of people real angry.
Odyssey found a way to do it, to sort of touch back to 2D Mario games. There are long and very fun segments of that game where you play a 2D platformer. Yeah, it can be done. And Mario is a bit of a blanker canvas to kind of project things like that on. I'm not sure how you would get away with that in Breath of the Wild, but
yeah, it feels like Mario is a little more sort of like flexible in that respect than like I can imagine them just having a side-scrolling section in Breath of the Wild too. Unless they did.
Unless they do, yeah, exactly. You can't imagine it until it happens.
That'd be quite an upset.
Well, we'll find out in 5 months.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed.
Stay tuned.
If that doesn't happen, I still think it would be great to get the Link's Awakening style remake or something a little more polished up. We'll see.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you're curious, it's on the Nintendo Switch Online, the NES app, I guess. I don't think you would be able to tolerate too much of this game, but if you just drop into it for 10 or 15 minutes, just be like, oh man, Link can jump in this, that's weird. And then just turn it off when you fall into a bottomless pit. I think that would be an interesting experience.
Yeah. Certainly that experience of playing the first Zelda has burned me a little bit from going back quite so far on some of these old Zelda games.
It'll be frustrating, but in a completely different way.
Excellent. I need different types of frustration.
Yeah, that's what you want. You want some variety.
I've been playing this fun little game called Beacon Pines. This is on the Switch. I'm not sure where else it lives right now, but I think it came out first on the Switch. And this is a really cool narrative-driven adventure game that has a really interesting style in that much of it is sort of done as a storybook. With a voiceover narrator who kind of walks you through the entire thing, who intros and outros different scenes. You'll transition to essentially playing an exploration-based kind of adventure game where you have a little character who walks around and interacts with different things in the environment. You're not really even solving puzzles. You're just sort of triggering different types of interaction. And sort of influencing the narrative and the narrator a little bit by some of the choices that you make in the game. And then it ends abruptly. And the narrator says, no, wait, it can't end like that. We haven't been doing this for very long. Let's try that again. And then you get sort of a tree with sort of branching little narrative story beats where you can kind of go back and make different decisions and different choices to hopefully lead to a longer experience, to one that gives up a little bit more of the plot, and basically lather, rinse, repeat. It feels a lot like Radiant Historia, which is an RPG from a few years ago that I really liked on the DS. There was a remake of it that came out for the 3DS that was very much a JRPG with, turn-based combat and all that other fun stuff, but had this really interesting time travel mechanic where people would sort of die and story beats would kind of happen. And if you didn't feel good about that or wanted to try to keep somebody alive or had to make a different decision to see the story advance in a different way, you had a time travel tool that would allow you to go back to different points in the story and make different choices. And that would sort of keep people alive and send the story in a different direction. Beacon Pines operates in a very similar way, albeit with sort of a fairy tale kind of skin placed over it. And none of those sort of obviously JRPG turn-based story thing, combat beats and stuff like that. So the story here is you're a little kid who happens to be a reindeer. It's just weird. All of the characters in this are anthropomorphic. So they're, they have like human bodies with animal heads. Kind of an odd design
so it's
choice.
not like you're a little kid reindeer. Well, you're like a little Animal Crossing neighbor.
Yes, yeah. You're not wrong. Yeah, absolutely. So you're a little kid, and your best friend is a cat kid. And it feels a little bit like a Stranger Things episode in that you're basically kind of riding bikes and having fun and enjoying your summer off, but something mysterious is going on in your little town, the town of Beacon Pines. There's a rich family that is maybe up to no good. There's a mysterious chemical plant that closed under bizarre circumstances a few years prior. There's a big new company that has moved into town and is kind of slowly and kind of quite nefariously taking things over. There's a summer festival, and there's a huge cast of characters, and there's a bunch of different people you can kind of get to know and chat with. And again, this whole storybook thing kind of layered over it, where you'll go through a bunch of different story beats, you'll make connections with different characters, conflict resolution, and then the story will end. And you have the option to go back to a different place on the tree, essentially, the timeline of this story, and make some different choices. All of these are done in a way that is, the story is sort of being written in this storybook. You'll get a little blank space and then a couple of different words that you can choose from to make a different choice to influence the next thing that happens, and hope that it sort of leads you a little further in, another chapter in. You do find that you get multiple timelines kind of happening in your brain as the game player and the reader at different times, it can be like, in the 5th hour of this thing, it's a bit of a heavy lift. And you're sort of like, how does this story connect to that choice that I made? Is this the one where that character is missing, or are they still around and, in the presence of these other characters? I'm trying to not give stuff away. So yeah, it can get a little confusing. The cool thing is the developers have created little tells that kind of help you achieve some degree of continuity in your brain. A character will dye their hair. So there's a timeline where they have blue hair, and there's a timeline where they don't.
The blue hair timeline.
Right. So it helps you sort of get a little visual clue to sort of like, oh, this is the one where X, Y, and Z happen because their hair is blue.
Okay.
Or they'll change their clothes. They'll have a different shirt on or things like that. So there's little fun, smart, not super overt, but clever ways of telling you sort of where your decision making has led you. Because you'll go from like chapter 9 to rewind back to chapter 4 and make different choices. And you skip chapter 5 entirely because you didn't stick around long enough. The story ended before you ever saw chapter 5. And so you jump back and forth to different points in this storybook, and you see pages flip and words cruise by you in different illustrations and stuff like that, all tying back to what's happening in the story. So you're kind of doing a choose your own adventure game. It's super cool. I'm having a really good time with it. It's very clever. There's some really just beautiful artwork. These great transitions where you go from sort of an illustration on a page and the camera sort of pans into it, and it slowly starts to fill like a watercolor, almost kind of bleeding to the edges of the page and the screen. And then you're in it. Your characters pop up, you move around, you interact with people, and then it'll sort of pull back again and turn back into a storybook, and words will start to fill in on the right side of the page. The narrator is awesome. It's this beautiful, I don't know her name, but she has a Scottish accent. She's a little sort of like in on it with you, and we'll have like little asides and little sort of like, we'll share your frustration at stories that ended too abruptly or characters that never got some resolution. She'll be like, well, what about that thing that happened? They never explained that. We got to go back and try again. And you'll flip back to another point in the book and try to make some different choices. And it's really, really cool. I think I'm having a really good time with it. It's a very neat and kind of admirable effort to do something different with an adventure game, where it's not you just sort of like, shaking every tree looking for some clue to fall out that you can kind of solve a weird, bizarro puzzle with that leads to the next story beat. Here it's all kind of interesting fairy tale storytelling kind of connections that you're trying to make. Yeah, it really, in a lot of ways, feels like a choose your own adventure.
Are these multiple paths like intersecting, or I'm trying to imagine? It makes me think of like various visual novels that I played, like 999 or what's the other one? Virtue's Last Reward, where you would have all these branching paths, and most of them would result in like everybody dying or just you getting a premature game over. But you're also encouraged to sort of take the knowledge that you would acquire from going down all these different paths and use them to find the one sort of true path to the good ending or the correct ending or whatever, however they want to describe it.
Yeah.
Could you conceivably play through like Beacon Pines and get sort of the one ending accidentally, I guess? Or does it require a little bit of replay and retracing your steps?
It does require a little bit of replay and retracing your steps, because the like the words and the phrases that you use to fill in the blanks in the story that influence it to sort of go in a different direction are only unlocked by playing other timelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 13 Sentinels. That's the
is that how that works?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the example I can give sort of our listeners and you, DJ, is there's one scenario where you have somebody that you're trying to sort of like get information from, and you and your friend decide it's time to play good cop, blank cop. So you go through your little word lexicon and try to sort of figure out like what fits in that blank. And the first one, of course, you pick is good cop, bad cop. And that spirals in a certain direction and it gets you a certain resolution. And then, no, let's try that again. Let's go back. And so it's not good cop, bad cop. It's some other thing. It's chill cop, or it's crazy cop, or, so it sort of elicits different responses in the story, different responses from the character you're trying to get information from, that allows the tale to kind of venture off in a different and hopefully more satisfying direction. And the cool thing is that once you use some of those phrases, they start putting little check marks next to them so that you don't go through the Phoenix Wright thing where you're just like, try everything, put anything in the blank and see if it helps. You get sort of like all the answers are used once, none of them are repeated. So you get the sort of the satisfaction of like, okay, I've fully ventured down that branch of the story. I can sort of take it in a different direction by making other choices. So it's cool. I hope I'm describing it in a way that sounds compelling, because I've had a really, really good time with it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued just because I find a handful of these games with the branching storylines and that sort of thing. As you were describing this, I was thinking, okay, is this like 999? Is this, I almost thought it might be like 80 Days at some point, the 80 Days Around the World game. But now to hear you describe you're unlocking these keywords, it sounds very much like 13 Sentinels, which was very cool. I
guess that's sort of the puzzle of it, is exploring all the corners, talking to all the characters, taking every sort of branch of the story to its kind of conclusion so that you can get more options to go back and try ones that have not led to satisfying conclusions. Yeah, and it sort of touches on a lot of like kind of interesting kind of pop culture tropes. And like I said, it feels a little bit like a Stranger Thing kind of kids on bikes thing initially. And then it's a little bit of a Twin Peaks thing because Beacon Pines is a very bizarre place with a strange history. There's missing characters. There's somebody maybe died under mysterious circumstances. So there's a little darkness to it. And it's all handled really, really well. There's some really good writing, really good characterizations. Yeah, and I tend to be a little... not overwhelmed, but just sometimes a little bored by like super text heavy games. Like I want to read a book. I'll just read a book, right? Like I don't want to read a video game. But there's some really good voice acting in this. The choices in the branching paths always seem really kind of fun, and I'm curious to see where they'll go. It's good. I think they've the creators here have done a lot of really like big work to kind of avoid the pitfalls of what a game like this, structured like this, could sort of like devolve into, and have found kind of really interesting ways to keep it feeling fresh and keep me as a player hooked on it for the 5-6 hours it's taken to get to the end.
So you made it through the entire thing?
Yeah. I'm nearly 100%. I've used every word in my lexicon. I found all the little icons. Like I said, I was really into this thing. I definitely went back and found every little corner of the story that I could explore in some different direction.
Interesting. Well, yeah. I didn't realize I was looking for a 13 Sentinels but could be cool. Maybe I'll check it out.
Now I'm kind of interested in 13 Sentinels. I may have to see. The Nintendo's doing just a huge kind of Black Friday sale right now, and I keep getting alerts for all these very cheap video games that I want to play.
Yeah, man, 13 Sentinels is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think if you can tolerate the fact that it's a bunch of high schoolers, it is just constantly surprising and it's like, I don't want to give anything away, but if you like a good mystery and just kind of being confused and be like, what happens next? How can they possibly explain this part? And also it has giant mech battles, which are very exciting. Really, really good. Definitely worth checking out.
Excellent. So no mech battles in this game, but this is Beacon Pines.
No mech battles, yeah. But there is a tiny reindeer child.
Yeah, and it is weaker for it, by the way. But yeah.
Sure.
So Beacon Pines, I'm playing it on the Switch now. It may be available in other places, but it definitely feels like a good sort of game to kind of carry around with me, kind of play, in the little downtime that I have, 20 minutes before bed, and et cetera, kind of thing, and explore a chapter, make a couple of choices, and come back to it tomorrow. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend this.
Oh, well.
Yeah. So talk to me about Somerville.
Yeah, so I played Somerville, which is a game. It's not really a sequel to Limbo and Inside, which are two. I don't know. I was struggling to describe these games. They're like side-scrolling platformer, like adventure games, I guess. Side-scrolling adventure games. And those were from Playdead Studio. And I think this is Somerville comes from a few of the creators from Playdead who have branched out and formed a new studio. But you can still see quite a bit of the style from both Limbo and Inside in this. They're trying to distance themselves quite a bit from their previous games. They're saying like, oh, we've created something completely different. Please don't think of it as a sequel to Inside or something very much in that mold. But as I was playing it's very familiar to both of those games, especially Inside, if you've played either of those, which is not a bad thing. Like, I don't say that in a bad way. But, I don't think it's the complete break that they seem to be shooting for in some of these interviews.
Yeah.
But that's fine, because I really enjoyed both of those.
Yeah, exactly. That's not a bad touchstone either. I think you could do a lot worse than to be lumped in with games like Inside and Limbo.
Yeah. They're both, like, as simple as the premise seems, they both still feel very unique to me. Like, they're definitely standout games in that genre, I suppose. So how does Somerville start out? It is, I don't want to give too much away, because it's one of those games where there's, like, kind of a weird, mysterious situation happening, and part of the, like, enjoyment of progressing farther in the game is just trying to piece together what exactly is going on. But basically, at the start of this game, you are sort of looking in on this family who's just having a quiet night at home, and then crazy things happen. I don't even remember how much they get into it in the store description page, which is sort of like my benchmark for how much I can spoil when talking about these games on the show. I think they say that you're like trying to deal with like the intimate repercussions of catastrophe, I think is how they put it.
That sounds familiar, yes.
Yeah, Something ridiculous happens. And you can see this from, like, if you go watch the trailers.
The trailer gives a little bit more away, and I think if you enjoy sort of the surprise of what a game like this kind of brings, maybe don't watch the trailers.
Well, it's been a while since I watched the trailer, so I don't know exactly how much they give away. But basically, a world-changing event occurs, and you're left controlling members of this family and trying to just deal with the aftermath. And you do that by sort of walking to the side of the screen like you did in Inside, and I'm sure they'd be furious if they heard me describe it that way. But it basically just turns into an adventure game where you're the dad in this family trying to reunite with the rest of his family, and you do this by making your way through sort of these countryside environments and solving these like environmental physics puzzles. And man, this sounds so mechanical, but it reminds me, not just of Inside, but of we played a couple of those Far games over the last few years. There was Far Lone Sails and Far Changing Tides, I believe.
Correct. Yes.
In which you were just a little dude on some kind of boat, and you would have to solve similar environmental physics puzzles to like get your boat from one side of the screen to the next. But in Somerville, you're basically just always on this path to hopefully reunite with your family. Like they're out there somewhere. You just have to find them.
And I'll point out too the thing that I like, sort of the connection between Limbo inside Somerville and the Far games, and I would even extrapolate it out to the Little Nightmares games, which I think are very similar, albeit on a much more sort of horror bend. Is that all of that, sort of the heavy lifting, is done completely wordlessly. That there's no there's no narration, there's no push X to talk. You don't interact with anybody else in the world. It is you alone quite a bit, trying to sort of figure out, how do I sort of eliminate this obstacle so that I can progress to get to the point where I achieve some objective that the game is sort of trying to create for you. So a lot of your interpretation of events and what's going on and how did I end up in this place are very much left to sort of your personal kind of like filter of shaky understanding of the circumstances you find yourself in as a video game protagonist.
Yeah. One of the things I really enjoy about these, and this extends to the Far series as well, is that you really don't really have any innate abilities other than being able to jump and climb on things and like push and pull stuff and occasionally carry an object. It just feels so minimal, and it feels like you're just sort of at the mercy of your surroundings. And this departs from that slightly in that fairly early on in the game, I'm still not going to get into specifics, but you do acquire a unique ability that you use to solve puzzles and overcome obstacles. And that felt a little bit arbitrary to me. Like, why are you suddenly just like using this one thing to solve all the puzzles in a very similar way? But as I played more of the game, it started to make more sense. And I think it's actually, I don't know how to talk about this without like giving too much stuff away, but I sort of wish they had developed the ability in a sort of a different way than they currently do in the game, because it makes so much more sense at the end of the game why you have this specific interaction.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
The early parts of the game felt kind of like incomplete.
I will share for our listeners that I played through the beginning of this.
You played a bit of it, yeah. I almost forgot.
I think it's kind of broken up into chapters, but you don't see like chapter changes. But as I went to the internet to try to figure out like, where am I in this? Am I near the end? It said I was on chapter 5, which was surprising because I felt like I had not been with it for terribly long. But I'll say that it doesn't run great on the Xbox. I have an Xbox S. And it's a Game Pass game, and I'm like, well, that seems like the right way to do it. And it was really problematic. I kept getting caught on the environment, and it wouldn't let me exit out, and I had to restart the game 3 times, no joke, and no exaggeration. So I don't feel like it's quite ready for consumption on the Xbox. You played on the PC, and you had no problem with it, you said.
I had like almost no issues whatsoever. I think the only thing that seemed sort of weird was occasionally I would see, and this is also just because I had heard you had issues with it, so I was sort of keeping an eye out for stuff that could go wrong. Like, there were a few really, really minor graphical glitches that did not impede gameplay in any way, or like my enjoyment. But yeah, otherwise a totally like spotless experience. There are, it's all the interactions in this are sort of like feel physics based, where you do a lot of grabbing onto handles and moving doors, or trying to like open doors in a certain direction and dragging cables around. And that can feel a little janky. A few times it would take me multiple tries to like make sure my guy actually had a good grip on whatever object he was trying to move.
Yeah, I definitely ran into that as well.
But I think like that is just going to be an issue when you have a game that's designed in this way. And I'm pretty sure stuff like that happened in Far and even Inside to an extent.
Yeah.
So I didn't really hold that against it. It was silly, if anything, where I would just be like, why can't you open a door? What's wrong with you? Or why after you finish turning this crank all the way in one direction, do you just start turning it suddenly in the other direction? Like, you were done. But it's fine. Like, it didn't really ruin the experience or anything.
Yeah. I had a little bit of am I not standing on exactly the right pixel I need to be standing on to grip the handle in exactly the right way? Yeah, I guess I would have wanted it to maybe be a little more forgiving in that way, and it was not built to be that kind of game. So,
in terms of like just the puzzles,
no, just even those simple contextual things, like you said, grabbing handles or picking up things that you then have to sort of move. Yeah, the little use of the ability, the tool that you have, worked as it should have, but there were all these other sort of contextual things in the world that I was trying to like, can I climb over this? Do I have to knock it over? Do I have, and anything that I had to sort of like interact with in the environment, it felt like it was just, like, I kept like jamming the A button to grab, and I was never quite standing in the right place, or he would do it briefly for a second, and I was like, oh, there it is. I have to do that thing. Yeah. So yeah, it led to a lot of frustrations, and then it kept locking up on me because I would walk into something that I wasn't supposed to walk into, and it would just lock my character into it, and I couldn't get out of it. So
that's weird. That never happened to me.
So I gave up on Somerville. I was super into it. I was intrigued by this. You told me last week, hey, that game comes out next week that we were excited about, and I was, yes, it's on Game Pass. And sadly, I've not gotten past Chapter 5 because it just was not meant to be on the Xbox. Apparently,
that's too bad.
I hope it gets patched. I want to go back to it. I definitely want to see the end, but just was not willing to beat my head against that wall for any longer.
Yeah.
I'm excited that you liked it, though. I felt a little salty. I was ready to throw the controller, and then I'm happy to hear, a day later that you're like, no, it was really good. I had a good time with it. So
yeah, no, I did enjoy it. The ending, and I was not a spoiler. There are multiple endings. The conclusion, or the way the game wrapped up for me, at least, I found a little unsatisfying.
Oh,
but I enjoyed the rest of it up to that point. Like, there's like this weird sort of sci-fi mystery happening. It's one of those cases where I feel like they expect the player to do a lot of interpretation of what's happening, which is not always my favorite thing. In fact, if you remember in Inside, there was like stuff happening that was sort of auxiliary to whatever you were actually doing. There were like little things you could find, or little clues.
Mm-hmm.
That I completely missed the first time I played that. So I think anything that I could have synthesized from that in terms of like, or anything that would have helped me appreciate the end of that game better was completely lost on me. And similar stuff happens in Somerville. So I feel like it almost expects you to replay sections of it, or maybe go through it an entire second time and just be more observant about little things that are happening.
Oh, interesting.
Which is kind of like double-edged sword. Like, maybe the first time through is less satisfying than subsequent playthroughs. But still really enjoyed, for the most part, the puzzles. And man, just the atmosphere is still incredible. Like, visually, it's just a gorgeous game. Like, Inside is one of the most visually impressive games that I played, even though it looks very humble. Just like this sort of 2D side-scrolling thing. Or not 2D, but a very like minimalist sort of like side-scrolling presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole aesthetic is kind of back in Somerville, where it's like every scene is very hazy until you have like this very dramatic lighting that pops up and sort of cuts through like the fog and illuminates things in very exciting ways. There are all these like kind of sci-fi touches that pop up that are just, it like visually it's incredible, and I wasn't really expecting that from this game, so it's almost worth going through just to like sort of watch it, I think. In fact, at some points I do feel like I wish it had leaned more towards like, I don't know, sort of being an interactive like movie almost, because there are a few times when it tries to be a little too video gamey. Like, something will be chasing you, or there were some puzzles that would just kill you if you did them incorrectly. And I didn't think that was very satisfying. Like, the design could have been better in those areas. Yeah. But overall, like, I don't know how much of that you ran into, but it certainly happened less than it did in Inside, and especially in Limbo, which would just kill you like repeatedly over and over.
Oh yeah. Limbo was was just brutal in that way. Because it was so dark and so full of shadows that you never quite knew what was hiding, what dangers awaited. And certainly there's elements of that in Inside. And I would say there's elements of that in what's the one we're talking about now?
In Somerville.
In Somerville. I have Inside on my computer monitor right now. I was Googling it while you were talking because it's $2 on the Switch right now. So spend $2 on this game, play Inside on your Switch if you have one. I think there's definitely a little bit of a learn by dying element to all three of these games. Yeah,
that's accurate. I think it feels like a little dated compared to everything else, sort of design-wise in this. A lot of them, I mean, I don't want to get into specifics too much, but it just felt like, oh, did you really have to kill me at this point? Could you have just engineered a situation where it feels like there's something at risk, but you make an escape right at the last second or something like that, which I don't know. I don't need to prove anything by getting through Somerville intact. I just kind of want to be there for the atmosphere and kind of take in whatever the mystery is. But I don't know. I mean, it didn't drag down my enjoyment too much.
Cool. Yeah. Well, excellent. I mean, like I said, I'm bummed I didn't get to see the end of this thing. So
I hope they either patch it or just figure out what's going on with it. I heard weird things. I was trying to figure out if people were having issues with the Steam version as well. And apparently, so this is on Game Pass for Windows, in addition to the Xbox Game Pass. And I think people were saying the Game Pass version is actually different than the Steam version.
I know.
Performance wise. So I really don't know what's going on there. It feels weird that they have all these different versions that you think would be similar to each other that are apparently not. So I'm not sure.
All right. Well, I'll certainly keep an eye out for it. This is Somerville. Played on a PC.
Yeah, apparently. Also heard it's super rough on the Steam Deck, which is unfortunate.
Oh, okay. Well, that was my backup, so that's good to know as well.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what's going on. I don't have the most top-of-the-line PC or anything, and it was totally fine. But nevertheless, I hopped on the Steam forums, and there were people who I just assume if you're on the Steam forums, you have a computer that is just lit up with those RGB lights and everything, and it's got a 4060 or whatever. I don't know if those are out yet, but people were just like, "Oh, it doesn't run well on anything," and I was just like, "Well, maybe the secret is just having a super old computer." I don't know. Don't know what everybody else's problem is.
That's the hook.
This is one case where I'm not the problem. I am having a great time with this.
Good. I'll support you on that. Good job, DJ.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. All right. We should wrap this thing up. We're running a little long. All good stuff, though. I'm glad we finally got to Zelda.
Yeah. I knew you were waiting for it.
Absolutely. If you need any more video game hangover in your brain, you should follow us on Twitter. While Twitter is still a thing, at twitter.com/VGHangover. And you can always get show notes and links and tell us what you thought about this episode at VGHangover.com. We would love for you to contribute to our year-end Drunktacular episode. Go to VGHangover.com/drunk for more info.
Please do that. Get those questions in.
Yeah.
Make them good. Make them weird.
The clock is ticking on that. If you want to hang out with us, chat about video games and other fun things, you can join us on our Discord. There is a link to that at VGHangover.com as well. And it helps us immensely if you subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcasting app of choice. And hey, while you're enjoying a Thanksgiving dinner, happy Thanksgiving, by the way. If you're here in the United States, maybe tell the various members of your family and friend group.
Family. Yeah.
About Video Game Hangover.
Here comes Randy plugging his podcast again.
Just huge for us, please.
I don't know, maybe you have a couple family members who are into video games.
Yeah.
There you go.
If you're at the dinner table and the conversation invariably veers in the direction of some uncomfortable topic, there's any number you could choose from. Just go, hey, let's talk about our favorite podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, like, you go around the table saying what everybody's thankful for. You just drop, I really appreciate the VG Hangover show.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Yeah. That'd be amazing. Please do that.
Oh, boy. We want to give thanks again to Saria Lemus for intro and outro music this week. You can go to pettypanol.bandcamp.com, check out some of our work, and just add all of those albums into your cart and hit checkout. That would be terrific.
Yeah. If you're going to do a little Black Friday shopping, Bandcamp is a good place to start.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There you go.
We'll be back next week. Until then, this is Randy Dickinson.
This is DJ Ross.
Thanks so much for listening to Video Game Hangover. Goodbye.
Good night.
See ya.